This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
This is our first stop here in the cemetery in Amsterdam, and it's really a great privilege to be at the grave, at the kever, of one of the all-time great personalities in the Jewish people. Just to give you a little bit of a background of what Menachem ben Israel was dealing with when he came to Amsterdam. First of all, Menachem ben Israel came from, we don't like to use the word, but from a Marrano family. His family is from either Madeira or from Lisbon, and they were crypto-Jews, and they were accused of Judaizing by the Inquisition, and his father escapes just in a split-second timing from being burnt at the auto da fe, and he comes to Amsterdam. You have to understand, the Jews in Amsterdam at the time had been indoctrinated with Christian theology for a very long time. And many of the works that Menachem ben Israel wrote were to address the corrupted Christian views that Jews had maintained and held on to very strongly. So Menachem ben Israel wrote a sefer called Nishmas Chaim. Actually, there was a Rav in Kew Garden Hills who republished it, Rabbi Shmaryo Shulman. Nishmas Chaim was a book proving the immortality of the Jewish soul. Menachem ben Israel wrote a book, Mikveh Yisrael, or in Spanish, Esperanza de Israel, which expressed the yearning for the coming of Mashiach. All of these works were translated into a number of languages, into Latin, into Portuguese, into English. Menachem ben Israel believed that the American Indians were the Aseres Hashvatim. He writes that the American Indians were the 10 tribes. By the way, Menachem ben Israel also writes something very interesting. He says that when Mashiach comes, American Jews will return to Eretz Yisrael with their money. With their money, he says. So, but some say American Jews refers to the Jews of Central America. He doesn't have any predictions of the Jews of Borough Park and Flatbush. He writes a book, Pnei Rabbah, an index of the Medrash Rabbah. He writes a book, Tzuas Yisrael. He writes a book, Conciliador. So I have the title page over here, Conciliador, reconciled all of the difficult passages in the Tanakh. Now, Menachem ben Israel comes to Amsterdam, and in a certain sense he was shortchanged, because the leading rabbi at the time was Rabbi Shaul Mortera. Next rabbi at the time was Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav. And all of these Rabbanim joined to be one congregation called Neve Shalom. Now, if you have one congregation and 3 salaries, it does not leave a lot of money for the assistant rabbi, which was the position that was offered to Menachem ben Israel. So he figures he can't support himself. Even his writing wasn't enough to support himself. By the way, he opened up the first printing press here in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and he published many works. But he was not able to support himself. In all likelihood, he was shafted to this position because the community did not like the books he was writing, which were trying to weed out these Christian views that they so strongly held. Anyway, Menachem ben Israel was about to settle in the New World, in Brazil. Just as he's about to settle in Brazil, Yitzchak Abuhav is offered the rabbinate in Brazil, which frees up the assistant rabbi job here in Amsterdam, which was given to Menachem ben Israel. Now, he believed very strongly that in order for Mashiach to come, Jews need to be exiled to all 4 corners of the world, to all the extremities of the world. The furthest extremity Menachem ben Israel believed that was possible was England. And therefore he held that until the Jews are readmitted to England, the Mashiach could not come. And therefore, in that context, Menachem ben Israel traveled to England. He had audience with Oliver Cromwell, and he petitioned for the return of the Jewish people to England. The bottom line is, Cromwell did not allow the Jewish people to return to England. Menachem ben Israel felt very dejected. He comes back to Amsterdam with his son. Nebuch, his son, passes away in this area on the 2nd day of Rosh Hashanah, all likelihood buried right here. And then Menachem ben Israel himself had a premature death at the age of 53 here in Amsterdam. However, the petition of Menachem ben Israel was effective to the extent that Oliver Cromwell allowed the Jewish people to return unofficially. So that sort of opened the doors for the unofficial return of the Jews to England. Now, Menachem ben Israel was a great philosopher, he was a great Talmudist, and he believed very strongly in the Zohar HaKadosh, which was not common in those times. So he was a synthesis of Emunah in Talmud Bavli and in the Zohar HaKadosh. He writes about Gilgulim, so it was not common for a Portuguese philosopher to believe in the Torah HaGilgal. And again, the Sefer Nishmas Chaim is a sefer about the immortality of the Jewish soul. So it's a great zchus to be here at his kever, the man who began to pave the way for Portuguese Jews to come back to traditional Jewish beliefs. Amen. Okay, we're at a very important kever here. This is the kever of Shaul Halevi Mortera, who, when the three Kehilos united, he was the chief rabbi of all three Kehilos. Now, in his lifetime, he gave more than 500 drashos. Of these 500 drashos, they were condensed, synthesized into something called Givas Shaul, 50 drashos of Rabbi Shaul Halevi Mortera. If you want to know about the community here in Amsterdam, you study the drashos of Rabbi Shaul Halevi Mortera. He wrote a work in Lashon HaKodesh attacking Christianity, a very powerful work. He also wrote a work in Portuguese attacking Calvinism, which was never published. So just getting a picture for the times of what the Jewish community was like, the types of ideals and ideas and perspectives that had seeped into their practice and consciousness. Like we saw by the earlier graves, you saw the icons and images on the graves. So this is what the Rabbanim were dealing with. Menachem ben Israel is sort of bringing Klal Yisrael back to the true belief in Olam Haba and the immortality of the Neshama. But there were many foreign beliefs that the Rabbanan were fighting here in the 17th century. Rabbi Shaul Halevi Mortera, Zechusa Yagen Aleinu. Okay, we're here in Amsterdam, and again, this is one of the great all-time personalities of the last 1,000 years that many people don't know about. You look in the Chida, in the Shem Hagdalah of the Chida, on Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, so he says on his entry to the Sefer Oihal Yaakov, he was a Rav Me'orei Hamarav, a rabbi from the west, Ubala Orei Edom, and he came to the east. So that doesn't necessarily give us the full picture of the life of Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. By the way, Sasportas is a Ladino name, so it means Sheish, 6, Portas, ports, 6 gates. Okay, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas is born in 1610. What's very interesting is Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas is a direct descendant of the Ramban. Direct descendant of the Ramban. Now, he's 12 years old. He makes Siyum Hashas. In the year Shin Pei Ches, 1628, he's 18 years old. He's one of the Gdolei Hadar, and he becomes the Abbezin of Talmisan in Morocco. 20 years he's a Rav in Morocco. Okay, so he's a Moroccan Gadol from the Gerushe Sfarad. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas' most famous work, and what he is renowned for, is that when Shabtai Tzvi Yamach Shemoy reveals himself in the year 1626, Shin Pei Vav, and the majority of the Jewish world gets swept along, including many great Torah personalities, many great Rabbanim. Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas was the most outspoken rabbi against Shabtai Tzvi. He led the battle fiercely at great personal expense. And there's a big question, how was it that Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas was the only one who saw through the charade? He's the only one who had the conviction and had the honesty, and one of the primary reasons was he was not hired by his congregation, but rather he was an independent man, and therefore he was not subject to the will of the congregation. But Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas fought a valiant war against the Shabtai Tzvi. There were a few Moroccan tzaddikim who joined him, Rabbi Daniel Toledano and others, but Rabbi Yaakov was the most outspoken. Now he collected all of the whole entire polemic in a work called Tzitzas Neuvel Tzvi. Tzitzas Neuvel Tzvi. Later on, Rabbi Yaakov Emden abridged it in a work called Kitzur Tzitzas Neuvel Tzvi. He was a very dear friend of Menashe ben Israel. So when Menashe ben Israel goes to audience with Oliver Cromwell, Menashe ben Israel is accompanied by none other than Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. He was the rabbi in Sali. He was then the rabbi in Amsterdam. He writes letters to the Rabbanim in Venice, Reb Shmuel Abuhav, Reb Shimon Shapira, and he fought valiantly against the Shabtai Tzvi. He then became a rabbi in Hamburg, and amazingly, with all the difficulties of his life, Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas lived 86 years old. He was really Midas Hadin, and throughout history, and yes, in the hundreds of years since Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas, he's really the visionary and the compass that Klal Yisrael has always looked to when there are questions regarding redemption and false messianism. Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas is the goalpost, the compass of. Now, you ask, how did Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas know that he was not the Mashiach? Well, he writes many arguments. Number one, he pointed to the Rambam and the Geras Teiman, that the Mashiach has to be born in Eretz Yisrael. So, right, you don't even get to first base. Number two, he has to build the Beis HaMikdash. It's irrelevant that it creates a worldwide Shuvah movement. Many Rabbanim didn't want to speak up against Shabtai Tzvi because they said, well, let the repentance sweep the people. Yaakov Sasportas says that's not relevant to the issue of whether somebody is Mashiach or not. So he really identifies the specific criteria that are needed to judge whether somebody, in fact, is the true Mashiach. So we should be zoicha, standing in this place, of somebody who is able to weed out false Mashiach. You know, he was challenged. He said, well, do you not believe in Mashiach? He says, no. You don't believe in Mashiach, so you're willing to accept falsehood. I truly believe in Mashiach. So in the Zechus, like Rav Moshe writes, that the famous account, that the reason why Mashiach came from the Bnei Sloit is because they could have created a false Messiah and claimed they were pregnant from the Shechina, and because they didn't, they were Zoicha to the true Mashiach. So this is a Makoy Mesugo that we should daven for the redemption of the Jewish people. Zechusa Yagen Aleinu. Amen. Okay, just a brief word. We mentioned in 1639 the three Kehilos united: Kehila Reb Shmuel Mortera, Reb Yitzchak Abuhav, and Menashe ben Israel. So he was ranking number 2. Rabbi Isaac Abuhav di Fonseca. Now, he was then offered the job to be rabbi in Brazil, which opened up the second job for Menashe ben Israel. So it gives you a little bit of a picture for his eminence. He's from 1605 to 1693, and we have to research further the life of this great personality. Okay, just another brief word of a very important personality of Rabbi Isaac ben Abraham Uziel, Rabbi Yitzchak Uziel, 1560 to 1622. 1560 to 1622. Well, what do we know about Rabbi Yitzchak Uziel? Menashe ben Israel's family comes to Amsterdam. They're running away from Inquisition. And by the way, Menashe ben Israel's name was Manuel Diaz Soeira. Manuel. He comes to Amsterdam. The father says, we need to embrace open practice of Judaism, so they adopt the name Ben Israel. That's why they have the name Ben Israel. Menashe ben Israel is educated thoroughly in Talmud Bavli. Who taught Menashe ben Israel Gemara for 2 years? Reb Yitzchak Uziel was the Rebbe of Menashe ben Israel. He was the one who gave him his Torah education immediately when he came from Portugal. So it's a personality. Who would even remember? But through Menashe ben Israel, the transmission from Rabbi Yitzchak Uziel continued. Zechusa Yagen Aleinu. Okay, it's a great zechus to be here at the Jewish Ashkenazic Cemetery in the Netherlands, in Muiderberg. Now, this kever is not one which is even advertised or known about. We just stumbled across it because we're opposite the kever of Reb Shol of Amsterdam, who was the son of Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam. So we figured perhaps Reb Aryeh Leib is in the vicinity, and sure enough, right behind him, he's here. Now, this is a very old matzeva. So, for instance, this matzeva, the words are engraved in. So, one perhaps is allowed to read it. It's not kasha l'shikha, but these oisios are boilate. So the question is whether you're allowed to read it. We'll just read selected lines, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky says one of the inyanim of putting the stone on the matzeva is it counteracts the effects of kasha l'shikha. So it says that Liboy Lev Ari, Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam. Who's Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam? He's the son of Reb Shol of Krakow. Who's Reb Shol of Krakow? The son of the Rebbe Reb Heschel of Krakow. So he is the grandson of the Rebbe Reb Heschel. He lived from 1690 to 1753. He did not publish any works. His chedushim are mentioned in the works of the Binyan Ariel. Also, Tshuva Ayin Vav Chacham Tzvi, he brings the chedushim of his son-in-law, Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam. It's very interesting. He gives a haskama to the Sefer Mira Dachya, and he writes about the importance of learning dikduk. He says, Mi yifayar goydel pe'er mailas chachmas hadikduk, ki hi be'etzem uvrishoina l'chol mifal ki yadua liyoidei chen. It is primary. In other words, it's the first Miktsaya of Torah one needs to know. However, Babanasin or Rabim, ein doiresh, ein mavakesh, nobody pays attention to it. Maybe echad meir, one person in the city, but it's required not only for learning Chumash, it's required for learning Mishnah, and it's required for learning Talmud. Now his son was Reb Shol of Amsterdam, the Binyan Ariel, and his son was also Reb Hersha Berlin, and Reb Shol of Haag, Holland, was also a son-in-law. So this is now Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, as mentioned, was the son-in-law of the Chacham Tzvi. And in terms of his stance with the Shabtai Tzvi, of course, he was a very strong supporter of his brother-in-law, Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And when Rabbi Yaakov Emden came to Amsterdam, so of course it was through the help of Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, son-in-law of the Chacham Tzvi, Zechusa Yagen Aleinu, Amen. We have the great zechus to be at, first before to be at, to find the kever of Reb Shol of Amsterdam, who was born in 1717. He was nifter in 1790. Reb Shol of Amsterdam, you see over here, Binyan Ariel, is the son of Reb Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, who is the son-in-law of the Chacham Tzvi. So he's also the grandson of Reb Shol of Krakow, which makes him the great-grandson of the Rebbe Reb Heschel. So you see a very long line of a great dynasty. He wrote the Sefer on Chumash, Binyan Ariel. He wrote a Sefer on Chumash that he published in 1762, HaChatzar HaChadasha. We have Piskei Halacha on him about the status of Dutch cheese that he wrote in a kuntras, Halacha L'Ma'aseh Rav. Now, he was first a Rav in Hungary. He was a Rav in Dubna. He wrote Hagos on Masechta Nida, on Shulchan Aruch. And this is very interesting. In the year Tav Kuf Lamed Ches, 1778, who came to Amsterdam? The Chida. And the Chida went to visit Reb Shol of Amsterdam. And says the Chida in the Shem HaGdolim, Va'ani hadal zachisi lekabel pnei hashchina. I was zocha to receive the countenance of the Shechina, midei avri b'shlichos mitzvah, when I was coming through Amsterdam to collect for the yeshivos, v'zachisi lehisbasem mitayrasai. I was zocha to be taken in by the beautiful aroma of his Torah, umeyan v'sanusai, and from his humility, v'shleimusai, and his wholesomeness. The Binyan Ariel wrote a haskama to a very great tzaddik. Now this tzaddik, his whole life they pursued him. The rabbis of Venice pursued him ad mamish ad nefesh, and he comes to Amsterdam. Now, Not only did the Rabbanim of Venice pursue him, the Chacham Tzvi wrote very strongly against Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, as did Rabbi Yaakov Emden. However, we do know that they both retracted. So you say, how do we know that they retracted against Ramchal? Because the Binyan Ariel, who is the son of Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, not only retracted, but wrote a haskama for the Ramchal on one of his latest svarim. They retracted their original opinion when they met him personally when the Ramchal came to Amsterdam. So in one of the later svarim of the Ramchal, we have a haskama of Reb Shol of Amsterdam from the Binyan Ariel. Now, when the Binyan Ariel passed away, and they took out his coffin, they took out his bier from his house, it started pouring in Amsterdam. And the moment the Mita left Amsterdam, the skies cleared up. And that was a siman min hashamayim. The Binyan Ariel was mamish, one of the Gedolei Olam. He was ben lamed hei shanim haya b'malchai, and he was nifter at 73 years old, Shabbos Kodesh, b'shas mincha, and he was buried on Sunday, the 8th day of Tammuz, in the year Vatahi HaMisra Al Shechmai Tehei Nishmasoi Tzura B'Tzrar HaChaim. Okay, we were zoche to find the kever of the son-in-law of the Chacham Tzvi, Rabbi Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, and the Binyan Ariel, and now we stumbled across the kever of Miriam. Vatama Sham Miriam Vatikaver Sham Gezerah Hashav L'Chol Nefesh. Who's Miriam? She is Bas HaMefursam B'Chol Katzei Arz Yachv B'Doiroi. Who is that? The daughter of the Chacham Tzvi. So she is the Rebbetzin of Amsterdam, the Rebbetzin of Aryeh Leib of Amsterdam, the daughter of the Chacham Tzvi, sister of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. And she's buried here in Amsterdam. And Zechusa Yagein Aleinu. Amen. She's nifter. Hachal Eilama. On the day of the Shviras Haluchais, Shivasa B'Tammuz, Tavkuf Yud Gimel, which is 1753. And then she was buried on Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Tehei Nishmasa Tzura B'Tzar HaChaim. Okay, it's a great zchus to be here in Amsterdam, and we discovered the kever of the great-grandson of the Pnei Yeshua, Reb Shmuel Falk. Great-grandson of Pnei Yeshua, he's buried next to other Av Batei Dinim in Amsterdam, for instance, Rav Yosef Tzvi Donner and Rav Tzadok Tal. But the Reb Shmuel Falk, great-grandson of the Pnei Yeshua, how's that? Son of Rav Yisachar Beirish, grandson of the great Goin, the Pnei Aryeh, great-grandson of Rabban Shel Kol Bnei Hagoyla, Baal Mechaber Sefer Pnei Yeshua, and he was the Avbezin in Amsterdam. And at the zchus of being b'makom nuchasai, all of our tefillah should be neskabel barachamim uvratzain. So the stone was placed here not in 1839 when the great-grandson of Pnei Yeshua passed away, but rather on Yud Tes Elul, Tafresh Pei, in 1920 they refurbished this even, because it says over here, it used to be here but it was broken because of its age.
Taken it out of their hall, but they didn't know about it, so they left it in there, and it's still in there. Otherwise, very little was taken from this synagogue. What is another thing in the synagogue that might strike you? Do you have a sign with the Ten Commandments in the place? I don't know if you're going to the same synagogue, but do you have a sign like that, or just Aleph Bet Gimel, the first two words?
No, it depends on the shul. Some yes, some not. Yeah.
But many do.
Yes.
This was the very first synagogue in the world where they did it. And you can see it right here, and it's not just the first two words. It's not a complete text, but it's almost a complete text. And it's 10 lines, and it's two rectangular plates about a chetzi and shteamot chetzi, as is written in the Shemot. The letters are actually carved in wood, and they're bolted onto the board that's behind it.
I was asked to stand over here because this is the official location of the Rav in this Kehillah. Now, there are many great Rabbanim who served in this Kehillah, most notably Reb Shol Martera. Reb Shol Martera was the Rav over here, together with Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav. And another great Rav in this general Kehillah was the Binyan Ariel, Rav Shaul of Amsterdam. Actually, the Chida came to Amsterdam on 2 occasions, 1754, 1778. By the way, the Chida writes in Magal Tov, he's walking in the streets of Amsterdam, and he wasn't familiar with his surroundings. He got knocked over by a carriage. He had a concussion. He came into the shul all woozy. So you got to watch where you're going in the streets of Amsterdam. In any event, the Chida says that he met Rav Shaul of Amsterdam, and I want to share with you 3 machshavos that the Chida writes in the Sefer Avodas HaKodesh of what to think upon entering a shul. Okay, which means every time a Jew enters a shul, they're supposed to have the following 3 thoughts. Number 1, Am Mekayim the mitzvah da'iraisa u'mikdashai tiro. I fear the mikdash. There's a mitzvah da'iraisa u'mikdashi tiro. That's the first machshava. And then the Chida adds, that's not enough. One has to think, I have moira mimisha shoichen by. Not just I fear the mikdash, I have fear from HaKadosh Baruch Hu who resides in the mikdash. And number 3, before you enter a shul, you should think, I'm being noitel reshus from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be able to enter his house. You can't just enter a shul, you have to ask permission. Now, it's very interesting, because the board in this shul was very powerful, very strong. And aside from all the individuals we mentioned who were Rabbanim, Rav Shaul Mortera, Rabbi Yitzchak Abuhav, Menashe ben Israel, the job was offered to a notable Rav. His name was Reb Chizkiyahu di Silva. Anybody know who's Chizkiyahu di Silva? Pri Chadash. Pri Chadash said, he was thinking about it, the board said like this, we're going to pay you a handsome salary. Just don't tell us exactly what to do. Pri Chadash turned them down. Says the Chida, Ashrei Chelkoi ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba, not to take a position that he's subject to the board. We'll see, actually in the shul, there's a special boardroom, a room for the mamad. The Pri Chadash turned down the job, he went to Yerushalayim, he's buried on Har HaZeisim. But this was a position offered to him in the Kehillah of Amsterdam. So there were many great Rabbanim who did serve here, and this shul was in effect for many hundreds of years. Every time you enter a shul, remember the Chida. You're Mekayim the mitzvah, u'mikdashai tiro. You have moira mimisha shoichein by, and you're noitel reshus from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to enter. All of our tefillah should be niskabel, barachamim v'ratzain. I'll leave that for you. What do I get out of it? Okay, here we go. Picture. Thank you. Did you try it on? We're here at the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in the Maimad room. We know that the Maimad in the time of the 17th century was exceptionally strong. Rabbi Yaakov Sasporta said that he rued the fact that the Maimad was so strong, and because of that, he felt that the Rabbanon were not the ones who had the power, but rather the power rested in the hands of the Maimad. In fact, we've mentioned many times that the Chida says that the Pri Chadash was offered a job in Amsterdam, and the Chida praises the Pri Chadash that he did not take the job because it would be a job which was conditional, dependent on him following the dictates of the leadership of the shul. And this room represents the power that the Maimad had, and it was a power that not only did the Kehillah have to reckon with, it was a power that the Rabbanim had to reckon with, and many Rabbanim made the decision not to serve in such a capacity. Okay, everyone, before we leave, we just want to say this was the shul of Chacham Tzvi and Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas. This is a big Ashkenazic shul. So before we leave, we're going to say over a famous question of the Chacham Tzvi. The Chacham Tzvi asks the contradiction between two halachot of the Mechaber. When it comes to Hilchos Hadlakas Ner Chanukah, the Mechaber Paskins, that if you have a katan shehigia lechinuch, he could light the menorah and be moitzi the whole household. Yet when it comes to reading Megillas Esther, Chacham Tzvi says, katan shehigia lechinuch cannot be moitzi. What's the difference between Megillah, where the katan cannot be moitzi, and Ner Chanukah, that the katan could be moitzi? That's the kasha of the Chacham Tzvi. By the way, Rav Shmuel Rozovsky in Zichron Shmuel asked the same question. Says the Chacham Tzvi, the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah devolves on the house, not on the person. So the katan shehigia lechinuch could light it. The mitzvah of Megillah devolves on the person. So therefore the katan cannot be moitzi since he's not yet a bar mitzvah. Shal Suchuvas Chacham Tzvi HaChadashos. Okay. This is okay. Good Tavach. I'm very honored to be here with my good friend Rabbi Jonathan Siegel of the Amsterdam community, involved with the Kollel and other important askanos in the city. And we were discussing today, it was a pleasure to meet you this Shabbos, about this idea that we said over on Shavasar B'Tammuz. In a nutshell, the idea is, in preparation for coming here, we're learning a lot about the great Gedolim that lived in the city, most notably Rabbi Yaakov Sasportas and his work, Tzitzas Noivel Tzvi, and all the terrible tragedies that came about as a result of the false Mashiachim throughout history. And I'm just wondering, probably from the greatest disasters in our history were the false Mashiach. Why don't we have a fast day to commemorate these tragedies? And a friend of mine, Rabbi Isaac Yoslowski, reminded me we had learned from Rabbi Chanan that in his opinion, Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, that when Klal Yisrael made the Egel, the golden calf, which in effect was a false savior, false Mashiach, and it's a punishment for it is visited upon us in every generation in the form of, in every generation there's a false Mashiach. So in effect, Shavas B'Tammuz is a fast day to commemorate the false Mashiach. And at the same time, we've said over from the Chazam Sofer, Boaz lived with Rus on Shavas B'Tammuz, that means Oved was conceived on Shavas B'Tammuz. So at the same time, Shavas B'Tammuz is a day that could bring about the possibility for a true Mashiach. And so Zelu Mazeh, the Klipa comes and tries to sully it with the, that's why the Egel HaZahav, and probably why Shabtai Tzvi was insistent on eating on Shavas B'Tammuz. So Shavas B'Tammuz, and really the 3 weeks in general, it's a time of really the possibility for the true redemption, and at the same time we're mourning all the false Mashiachs that throughout history. So you shared with me a story today that I was very moved by and appreciative. Could you share it with us?
Yes, with pleasure. Okay, so yes, on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, I was, as usual, listening to Rabbi Glatstein, who I find to be an amazing speaker and with amazing ideas. And I saw this. I came across this shiur. He apparently just put it out when I saw it. It was in the afternoon on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. As you know, it's a very long fast day here. And
in Amsterdam, when is the fast over?
Yeah, fast is over at 11. This year was over at 11:03, which was early this year. Okay, okay. So in the late afternoon, I heard this shiur, and it was all about Shabtai Tzvi, and how Rav Yaakov Sasportas fought Shabtai Tzvi, and he was the main opponent of Shabtai Tzvi in the world. And he spoke over there about how Shabtai Tzvi had made a war, basically, on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, and declared them days of a Yom Tov, and said that it made a decree that we must eat on them. And the Rav brought a drasha about. Okay, thank you very much. And the Rav brought first of all, he said that Shabtai Tzvi made a notrikin of his name. Do you remember how backwards? It's spelled something eating on Tisha B'Av, and he also brought from the pasuk that they exchanged the amiros kvodam betavnis shor ochel esav, and esav is a shivasa b'tammuz. And I immediately thought that actually maybe the pasuk was actually being merames to what Shabtai Tzvi actually did. That he created an egel by saying
I'll tell you when I have this discussion, because just the power of Divrei Torah today, because you said you heard the Shiur on Shavas B'Tammuz.
Right. Yeah. So what happened was, first of all, I have always had a soft spot for Rav Yaakov Sportis because his yortzeit is the same as my father's yortzeit. So every year I visit his kever on his yortzeit is Dalet Iyar. So I go there every year, and I daven at his kever. When I heard this, I had always known that he had fought Shabtai Tzvi. That I knew. But when I heard the Shiur of Rav Glatstein, I didn't realize that he was the main opponent. I didn't realize what a war and what Mesiras Nefesh he did to fight Shabtai Tzvi, and how he was one man against, the whole world, basically, who had succumbed to this terrible cognitive dissonance of wanting to believe something that just wasn't true. And it gave me a new appreciation for what he stood. And then I'm thinking, today is Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, because the Rav just spoke about it, and I'd never realized that it was this war was connected with Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. So I said, I live, it's a 6-minute bike ride from my home to Rav Yaakov Sportis. So I said, why should I not go there? So I decided I have to go there today, and I have to daven at his kever. I was so inspired, and I said, I have to do it today. Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. This was his war. So because of this Shiur, I after Mincha, it was 9 o'clock, still light outside, still before Shkia, I got on my bike, went there, and was so disappointed that the Beis HaKfaros was locked. And I couldn't get in. But I work with the Chevra Chedisha.
You know your way around.
I know my way around. I was able to get in. I found my way, okay? And I went in, and I davened there for a long time. We have plenty of time in Amsterdam, and it was very meaningful. And it was just I got the Shiur gave me a new appreciation, a new insight to the whole episode and who this person was. And it's a big nechama to me to know that I have a neighbor 6 minutes away who was such a gadol b'Yisrael.
So just to conclude, I want you to share with me and with the listeners. I know there's some connection between Amsterdam was considered like the Yerushalayim of Europe. What is it?
Yeah. So what I have learned since I've been here is, and this is very interesting because a lot of the old Dutch people, like it's only in Amsterdam. There were many Yidden that lived in Amsterdam before the war. Like I mentioned today, I got to know a Mr. Rosen who used to daven in the old Lekstraat synagogue, and he could personally tell me he was 18 years old, before the war. He was put in camps, but he told me, that there were 800 people there on a Shabbos morning, 200 out in the street, and there were so many Yidden in Amsterdam. It was at least 1/5 of the city were Yidden. And so just like we find in New York that words creep into the language, like mensch and nash, and these have become American words. So this happened to the language here, especially in Amsterdam, where most of the Yidden lived. And there are certain words, but one of them is very interesting because the Yidden called Amsterdam Hamokim. That's how they pronounce it. It means the word Hamakom, right? We know that the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim are called Hamakom, and there's a reason for that. The Moral explains, because it's Makomu Shalolam, it's the Makayim of the world. Makom is the world Makayim, and it's the Makayim of the world. But that's why it's called that. But Lamaisa, Yerushalayim is called Hamakom, and so Amsterdam was considered the Jerusalem. It was nicknamed the Jerusalem of the West, of Western Europe. So the nickname for Amsterdam was called, they pronounce it with a very Dutch accent, Hamokum. And actually there was some kind of songwriter that made a popular song called Hamokum.
Really?
Yeah. So, and there are other words also, like a prison is called abayis, and 5 is called hey, and there are many words in the old Dutch people. If you say these words, they don't even know what they are. They don't even know they're Yiddish words, but they know these words. It's very interesting.
Rabbi Siegel, we very much appreciate you taking a few minutes to spend with us, and we should both merit together.
Such an honor to have the Rav in town.
That Amsterdam should be built up to be Erva Envy Yisrael, and we should go back to the real Mokum, which is Yerushalayim. We should be there together with the restoration of Malchus Beis David. It's Tzayim Haravi, Tzayim HaChamishi, Tzayim HaShiur, Tzayim HaSiri, Yil Beis Yehuda, L'sasan L'simcha. Agut Avach.
Good vach. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.